have your consent. We already started the recording. So now, it's the first meetup in EMEA from the year. So welcome everyone. We're very excited to be releasing a new version of the meetups today. We're finally back, and thank you very much for putting this time today to join us, to join the community in this session. And we have two great speakers that you may know already. Both did present a couple of times before. They are Anu and Arno, and we will see more of them later on. And that's what you're here for. So I will try to cut short the introduction. It will be around 10 minutes where I will give you some product updates and the usual rules that we have for the meetup. We also added a little bit of pop culture there in the slide. You can see it on top right. It's completely intentional. So with that, we kickstart the VirtualMuleys session in EMEA for March. Thank you everyone for joining. This is a quick recap of the organizers. You can see Manik in the left, Sujo in the left as well. They are both working in AMER. Royston is working in APAC, and myself working in EMEA. We do have another reference there, and yes, it is a JoJo reference. With that, we will continue. Keep in mind, there is three main topics here that we always remind you. The training, for anything related to training, training.mulesoft.com. The second one, any question around training, certification vouchers that you're having issues with, go to help.learn.mulesoft.com, and they will be able to help you. When you have doubts around the product, help.mulesoft.com and stackoverflow.com. These are common places to go to. So the guidelines for today: pop your questions that you're having during the sessions in the chat, and anyone from the community will try to answer them. If there are any remaining questions at the end, we will try to ask all of them in your behalf. The recordings will be shared in the Meetups page, as you know, or in the YouTube channel, which is always easier. You can just subscribe there. The feedback, I repeat this all the time, but your feedback is important. After the session, you receive a survey. Fill that survey with your opinion. If you want more of something, less of something, and we will hear you. Now, celebrating March, there's an event happening in MuleSoft, and before we jump into that, I'm going to do a personal wrap-up here. It's around Paul Krugman. He's a Nobel Prize winner in economics, and this is a quote that he said in the masterclass course and in his articles, that there's strong evidence that children in low-income families that receive food stamps become more productive and healthier adults, which means that the programs are actually good for the long economic run, for the long economic growth. The reason why I'm sharing this is a personal experience with the masterclass around Paul Krugman economics course, is because we're kickstarting a charity edition where we're trying to help a charity called End Child Food Poverty. It's basically based in UK, and it's looking to make sure that all kids across, in this case, UK and EMEA, are able to have access to food. So for anyone that is joining today, I will be donating £1 to the charity. I will share the URL after the session. You will have it as well. You can see that I will be donating. And for every £1 that I donate, Salesforce is going to donate another one. We already have around 6,000, and we're starting, not even starting March yet. Okay, with that, we finish the charity episode. We go to the next step. This is what is coming next in the online group meetups in the VirtualMuleys. We have one session next week, a panel meetup. 3 people, just like you in the community, decided to step up. You can see there Kevin Jervis, Francis Edwards. You probably know him. He's a Mule ambassador. He's everywhere. And he's always doing very good contributions to the MuleSoft space. And you can have also Mark, who is joining us, I think, for the first time as a panelist. And we will be discussing those integration challenges that they have found and how they did, what they did to handle them. And this includes MuleSoft space. Again, the advantage here is from the community. Sorry, Arno, were you going to mention something? Or Anu?
No.
Excellent. Sorry about that. Let's continue. That is happening next week. And in 2 weeks, we already have PKO. There is the AMER EMEA PKO. You will hear from Adam on IoT with MuleSoft Salesforce and the game-changing green offices, and the hub and spoke architecture with Salesforce. This is from Maria and Brett from Accenture. Now, I wanted to also add a special thanks, a special mention to Adam, because he has been leading the Dublin MuleSoft Meetups, and he's been an active member of the community for more than 2 years. As a speaker, as a attendee, you will know about him if you were based in UK. Now, there's another PKO happening on that 21st March. In case that you're interested, it's around event-driven architecture, and it's also covering some other aspects of the deployment models for MuleSoft. You will get another point of view. You can sign up for all these events already, and they are from the online English group VirtualMuleys. Some announcements and updates very quickly, because we're 4 minutes away to give the mic. So the first one is the thanks to the hackathon participants. Keep in mind that all the code that was done during the hackathon is available for you. It's open source. So if you're looking to get that evangelization in the company, if you get people motivated, enthusiastic about MuleSoft, you can always grab these projects and showcase them around inside the company. That is one of the goals that we had with the hackathon. And you can see there, Pat, Darren, and Tirthankar, how they managed to win the hackathon. Another release, the Friends of Max. This one is an introduction to MUnit. It's around 7 minutes, and it will cover very basic steps. What is MUnit? Why is it needed? The anatomy of an MUnit test suite, and the best practices to follow. Remember, Friends of Max videos is a new series that takes between 10 to 15 minutes, and they will help you in different technical topics. You can look up for overview and demonstrations. That are the 2 main types. Before we go forward, there's a safe harbor statement here. Do not make business decisions based on what you will see in the next slides. This comes from the product release that you saw a couple of weeks ago. There's 3 slides that I wanted to highlight for this meetup, and I think they're relevant. Now, the first one is around Connect. You have the connectors, main connectors releases here, Amazon Kinesis data streams, there's the Slack one, there's Stripe, there's Zendesk, and there's some other new connectors for Salesforce Commerce Cloud, Splunk, and PI Historian. You can read more and hear more about it in the product release session webinar that was recorded, and it's available for you as well. If you don't have the link, let me know and can send it back to you while there's the other sessions going. Now, Cloudhub 2.0, this is still very early game. There will be a couple of improvements there, but the details so far are not going to be shared. Just be aware that there's, from your point of view, there's no changes in the runtime. You will have the similar user experience with extended user interface support. There will be better performance, or let's say highly scalable and resilient, as is mentioned there, with the Cloudhub 2.0 release. But don't worry, that doesn't mean that you have to change. It's nothing related as a Mule 3 to Mule 4. Another one, very interesting, service mesh opportunity here, 1.2 release. There were a lot of people requesting for it, so now it's supported by OpenShift. You will have your microservices there using the Anypoint platform with the management console, and which we call also the control plane, and you can have your implementations elsewhere in your own Kubernetes deployments. Okay, as long as you install the Mule agent. If you have questions on that one, just drop it in the chat. I will try to answer as many as possible. Important there is the support for ISO 1.8, and you can see what's expected for Q1 is already partially released with the ACM 1.2. Nice. We already made the 10 minutes, and with that said, community, again, anything that you're thinking that we can improve, just pop it into the chat or even pop it into the survey. That will be the ideal place. If it's too long, the introduction, too short, you can say it. We are finally ready to start, Arno, because Arno is in a later time zone. He's going to be the first one in the session. With that, I will stop talking and I will give the sharing back to you, Arno.
Thank you, Angel. And share and present.
Yes, we
so
can
you
see
should
your
all
screen.
be able to see my screen. Perfect. Thank you, Angel. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Arno Brugman. I'm a strategic advisor within customer success, and it's my pleasure to present to you our take on Center for Enablement, or C4E. And the agenda for this session is, why do we have a C4E? How does it work? What is the catalyst methodology? What are the evolutions of a C4E? And then we'll have time for questions. Let's start with why. Why do we have a C4E? What we've noticed is that over time, the delivery capacity, illustrated by the blue bar at the bottom of the screen, of an IT department hasn't changed in the last couple of years. So the delivery capacity has basically remained the same, or maybe even decreased slightly. But if we look at the demand on IT, on the new types of technologies they need to support, those are growing because of cloud, software as a service, mobile, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence. And that means that we're demanding more and more from IT, even though the delivery capacity stays the same. And that creates a gap, a delivery gap. It creates a gap between what IT is able to deliver and what the business actually demands from IT. And that delivery gap needs to be addressed, otherwise we'll remain in this situation and none of these new technologies will be adopted, or they will be adopted poorly. So what MuleSoft has done is it has looked at this delivery gap and decided that a new way of working is needed to make sure that while the IT delivery capability remains at the same level, organizations can still support the growing requirements of the business. Those demands on IT need to be addressed. And what we've done is we've created a new IT operating model that basically comes down to this, and that is that IT only does enablement and creates foundational assets for the support of all these new technologies. And the business itself consumes those assets and innovates by addressing the demands that are outside of the capability and delivery capacity of IT. So how does that work? This new operating model basically puts a new emphasis on the consumption and production of services. But it's the consumption that allows line of business, IT, and developers to consume services that were produced, created, built by central IT. And this becomes a cyclic process where the central IT builds an API to expose data from a system, maybe SAP, maybe Salesforce. That system API can then be published in a marketplace. And the line of business IT developers can use this API, this Salesforce API or SAP API, to build additional services on top of. And they can do that because the produced API is placed in a marketplace and it allows self-serve and reuse of this asset. They can then consume that API and provide feedback, but also provide usage metrics of this API to let central IT know that it's very useful, but it would be more useful if additional attributes were added to the API. And that process in itself, this cyclic process, creates a new way of working that allows line of business IT to attract developers to work on the consumption and the addressing of this delivery gap. In the end, what we're doing is we're driving a composable enterprise. This means that IT and business together are responsible for this new operating model that is based on building an application network that exposes the underlying systems, your critical systems like SAP, like Workday, like SQL Server and ServiceNow and Salesforce. Those are exposed, and the business can then consume those services through APIs and build brand new experiences and even new business models. And that can be as simple as a mobile interface for an existing service, or expansion into a completely new area, or even in a completely new vertical. And composable means that instead of building point-to-point and linking mobile to backend systems in a point-to-point fashion, you're actually creating a structure where you're enriching your network every time you expose a new system and every time you create an API. So how is this new model, this new operating model, how is that driven? Because on the business side, we have priorities. We have products and services, processes, insights, resilience. Whereas on the IT side, we have core systems, applications, data, and infrastructure. And how are we going to get these two together? We have learned that business and IT need to have a contract. They need to have a strategy in place between the two of them to make this a reality and to make this happen. And for that, we have learned that an API strategy that is business-led but driven by IT is a crucial component in filling in that delivery gap, in creating this new operating model that allows you to accelerate the development of new technology, innovate at speed, and make sure that you address the needs of the business in a timely fashion. So MuleSoft, of course, enables this new model, and it does so through 3 core pillars. The first one is technology. We deliver our Anypoint platform and the Mule runtime for building these new integrations and building this composable enterprise. We also deliver the process called API-led connectivity, the 3-layer approach that allows you to expose systems, compose new data objects through process APIs, and expose those through experience APIs to websites, applications, mobile applications, etc. And then finally, the most important part of this operating model is the people. People need to be organized, and we do that through the C4E, the Center for Enablement, that is driven by production and consumption of APIs. How do we do this? I think this is a very important slide in this slide deck, because this shows you the difference between a center of excellence and a center for enablement. On the left, we have a center of excellence, and the center of excellence basically owns the platform, does the development, and does all the operation. That means that every request, every bit of access, every discussion needs to be with the center of excellence. That means that they become a delivery bottleneck, because everyone has to wait for their turn in talking to the center of excellence, getting their time, getting their attention, and it's inefficient, and also it stifles innovation. It stops you from innovating at speed because you have to wait for them to be available. Now, in the C4E scenario, the consumer works directly with the delivery unit. That delivery unit is enabled by a Center for Enablement. So the Center for Enablement owns the platform and enables other organizations, other departments in the organization to do the development and the operation of their specific needs. That means that the consumer now has self-service, can benefit from reusing assets that are already created and continue to build a composable enterprise. And at the same time, it's scalable. If I have my own department and I want to create a new customer experience, I don't have to go to a center of excellence. I can actually self-serve the existing data that is available in my organization, reuse what I need, add to the composable infrastructure that I have to my application network. And it's scalable because I can hire 2 developers or I can hire 200 developers. That's totally up to me. Everything I need is available through the Center for Enablement, and delivery is done by separate teams that are enabled. So my developers will be reusing whatever exists, and if they need new components, they create them. They share them with the rest of the organization for those assets to be reused as well. So what are the responsibilities of a C4E? I think it's very important for the C4E to be able to discover the different use cases in the organization. And this is also called demand generation. So the C4E actively works with line of business to find out if there are use cases and or solutions that require integration. And they offer their platform as a way to do those faster, better, higher quality, less risk, security built in, etc. So the discovery phase is basically where you go out in your organization and you check for demand. At the same time, the C4E is also responsible for evangelizing the platform, evangelizing the capability of integration, evangelizing the existence of an API strategy. So the C4E is responsible for creating awareness. They do that by organizing information sessions. They do that by making sure that the information in the marketplace that stores all the assets, all the created assets that can be reused, it shares that information, but also it enables organizations, departments, line of business IT, other than the C4E itself, to onboard onto the platform, to use the platform, and to consume the existing assets and reuse them. And at the same time, it provides best practices. That means that there are best practices for everything you can imagine when it comes to integration. So if you have a specific use case, there will be a best practice on how to implement that use case. If you have questions about networking or security access, there will be a best practice on networking, security access, but also on logging, on monitoring, on error handling. All of these best practices exist, and all of these best practices are available to everyone who joins the platform, who onboards onto the platform, and starts using MuleSoft. Next responsibility of the C4E is the governing. They are the platform custodian. They own the platform. So they are responsible for security, for access management and provisioning, not just adding users to the platform, but making sure that when users add assets to the platform, those are secured, those are managed and reusable. So basically the C4E acts as the police, the platform police, to make sure that everything is according to corporate standards, security, and nobody has access to the platform that shouldn't have that. And then finally, the C4E is responsible for mobilizing. expanding, improving, and activating. What does that look like? So expanding is all about making sure that what exists now is improved, made better, it grows, and there's never a moment on the horizon when you're done. This is a continuous process where you take existing services, existing APIs, existing solutions, and look at them, try to improve them, and create a next version for consumers to use. This is a continuous process that requires the C4E to remain focused. And it's helped by all the different developers in the line of business who create new versions of APIs, who create new assets, adding to the application network and adding new ways of consuming data. So, in summary, the operating model that we're proposing for implementing your C4E is a different way of organizing so that you drive the speed and innovation at a scale and a pace that allows you to answer all the demand the business has. And that Center for Enablement is basically a cross-functional team driven by central IT that provides the productization and publication of APIs and integrations in a marketplace that can be discovered and self-serve used to create additional value. And they should encourage collaboration between the different development teams to continue searching for solutions and to continue using the marketplace to either consume existing products and existing APIs or create new APIs and share those in the marketplace for future use. So if we look at the C4E, what are the tasks that a C4E needs to execute? And if you look at the circle in the middle, this is around API strategy, about best practices, about delivery, support, deployment and management, and platform architecture. And there are basically two different tasks, and that's on the platform side and on the enablement side. So on the platform side, as I said, they are the custodian of the Anypoint platform for your organization. They are the Anypoint police. And that means that when it comes to platform architecture, they need to provide the reference architecture. They need to provide the deployment model. They need to provide the security architecture. And they need to provide the automation and tooling to ensure that the platform is easy to onboard onto, but also easy to use. Then for deployment and management, they need to make sure that the platform build and configuration is completed. They need to have monitoring and operations management in place. They need to constantly verify the available capacity on the platform and the performance of the applications. And they are responsible for all the upgrades and patching of the different environments. And then finally, the C4E is basically your second line of support before you go into MuleSoft support. So they provide application support guidance, they provide platform support, and they provide the support escalations into MuleSoft. They should be the ones logging the support case with MuleSoft. And this can be automatic if you have your own support system, then it should just be a click of a button and a support case should be raised with MuleSoft. And they should also be the ones to discuss a enhancement process, the product enhancement process, or ideas about future releases of MuleSoft. So that's the platform side. How about enablement? Enablement starts with making sure that the organization has an API strategy. I said earlier, the API strategy is that what links business and IT. That's the contract where business and IT agree how they are going to fill in this delivery gap, how they're going to deliver everything the business needs. So what are the components of the API strategy? Well, first of all, it should have the vision and objectives of the organization. There should be a picture of what good looks like, what it's supposed to be, what the architecture is supposed to look like. And it should look like API-led connectivity architecture, and the result should be a composable infrastructure that's based on an application network. The API strategy also makes sure that the IT strategy is aligned to your business strategy. It should register and collect key performance indicators about the strategy, about the platform, about the speed at which new value is created, and it should be reported. It should be in a dashboard. So the C4E is responsible for publishing a dashboard on the success of the adoption of the platform and enablement. And the C4E needs to provide the governance of the overall API program and enablement. Second item on the enablement side is best practices. Everything that is consumed by the line of business developers should be in accordance with the best practices of the C4E. So self-service needs to be enabled by the C4E, and assets need to be very easy to consume. So as a standard and as a best practice, those assets are documented. They're placed in a marketplace, accessible to everyone. So if you search for a Salesforce System API, you will find it, and you will also find documentation about it, how to consume it, and maybe even an example on how to consume this API in your application so that you can get data from the System API and use and consume it. And then finally, evangelism. It's extremely important to communicate the capability of integration inside your organization. You should organize events like brown bags or demonstrations, or what some of my customers do, they call it Integration Guild, and they have monthly or bi-monthly meetings where they present the latest innovations on the platform, the latest value that was created, and they share in the success, but they also celebrate the success of the integration capability in the organization. And then finally, the C4E enables line of business to accelerate the delivery of value, to accelerate the delivery of reusable assets from a central marketplace. The C4E, especially in the beginning, also provides subject matter expertise to the line of business teams. Initially, a line of business team will not have an integration architect or an integration developer. We'll have questions about how to use the CI/CD pipeline that the C4E has built for the platform. So those subject matter experts will initially join a line of business team to onboard them onto the platform, to explain the different services that are available, and provide the first bit of consultancy to get that line of business up to speed. And as soon as they have their own subject matter experts for architecture, for CI/CD, and for development, that enablement will slow down or completely disappear. But the C4E are responsible for onboarding everybody onto their platform and make sure that they can consume and discover the different assets that are available on the platform. So if you look at the current responsibilities of central IT, it says best practice, API strategy, and support, And then every different department has its own API strategy, its own platform architecture, its own deployments, its own development, its own operations, and its own support. That does not help when you want to accelerate the delivery of innovative new things. So the new federated responsibility of the C4E changes that. The C4E becomes the central responsible party for all the things that the individual departments should not be focusing on. So API strategy is an organization-wide API strategy that is the responsibility of the C4E. It's a contract between IT and business. They're responsible for best practices. They are responsible for providing the best platform architecture for the endpoint platform, the Mule runtimes. They are responsible for CI/CD pipelines, for managing the platform, etc. And they're also responsible for support and governance. That means that line of business IT, the different departments, can focus on what they need, and that is operating their data and developing new ways of getting to their data. So the C4E runs the enablement of the platform, and the different departments just focus on development of and operations. Why are we doing this? Because, first of all, it increases agility. If we do all the homework for the different departments, they don't have to focus on API strategy. They don't have to develop best practices. They use the ones that were created by the C4E. They can step in with a platform architecture that works. They don't have to come up with their own. CI/CD pipeline is in place. Management of the different environments is in place, and support and governance have all been arranged. So they basically step into something that is pre-made, pre-delivered. All they have to do is develop on top of it and make sure that they operate their own APIs. This enables self-service. All the assets you need, all the information you need about best practices, what use case should I use, and what does the architecture look like, what makes the most sense for my specific situation. You eliminate bottlenecks because you take the responsibility for the things that are foundational to the organization away from the individual departments. You put it in a central organization. You drive composability because you develop components in a much larger infrastructure. The scalability is unlimited. You're only limited by the number of people that you can onboard onto the platform using the C4E. And everything you build is built within the governance, the compliance, the security, and scalability of what the C4E set out to begin with. Next is our Catalyst methodology. Our Catalyst methodology is centered around 3 core pillars. Core pillars that we focus on, and that is business outcomes, organization enablement, and technology delivery. If we take these 3 core pillars and flatten them out, we have defined 6 paths to focus on. The first one is business outcomes. There's a separate business outcomes path. For technology delivery, there are 2 paths. One is the endpoint platform itself, and the second one is projects. And then for organizational enablement, we have the Center for Enablement, or the C4E, the internal support, and training. And these are basically covered through planning for success, to establishing a foundation, and then building to scale. And while you do that, you continuously measure the impact of the work that you're doing. If we now translate this to information that we've made available for you, we have a business outcomes playbook. We have endpoint platform playbook that basically tells you exactly what you need to do to enable the platform for other teams to onboard onto. Project playbook that tells you exactly how to run your technology delivery projects. And then finally, Center for Enablement Playbook, internal support playbook, and a training playbook. We're going to focus on today's topic, and that is the Center for Enablement, or C4E playbook. Every MuleSoft customer that has access to our support portal also has access to our Catalyst Knowledge Hub. And in our Catalyst Knowledge Hub, you will find under Organization Enablement, you will find that there is a Center for Enablement, or C4E playbook, that shows you exactly how to go from planning for success to establishing a foundation to building to scale. These are the steps that all our customers have to go through to get from not having a C4E in place and not being able to deliver all these new technologies to spinning up that operating model and delivering a Center for Enablement that allows the production and consumption of reusable assets, making sure that they are discoverable in a marketplace, etc. So if we look at the playbook, it starts with assessing the integration capabilities. It's basically a checklist of figuring out what do we have and what do we need to work on. This is something that MuleSoft provides as a Catalyst maturity assessment that gives you great insight into where are you in terms of maturity and what are the white spaces, what are the items that you need to focus on. Next is committing to a C4E, making sure that you have people in place that can fill in the roles of the C4E. And many times we get questions about how many people do I need in my C4E? Is 10 enough? Is 20 enough? I will get into more detail later on in this slide deck when we get to the evolution of C4E, but I always say as a minimum, and I actually have worked with a customer that has a 3-person C4E, where they have one person that is in leadership. It's basically the C4E lead responsible for the evangelization, for onboarding, etc., for communication. And then an architect who's basically the custodian of the platform, who is responsible for reference architecture and all the architectural assets. And then there's the third role is the C4E engineer, who's responsible for all the development guidelines, the best practices, but also the CI/CD pipeline. That would be the absolute minimum C4E. What's the largest C4E that I've seen? That's a central C4E that had over 60 developers in it as well. So you're looking at a C4E that's between 60 and 70 people. That's very big. It's not necessary, but this customer chose to keep all the development capability within the C4E because it's very predictable and easier to control. To establish a C4E, it says you need a mission and a charter. And it's very important so that everybody who joins the C4E or wants to onboard onto the platform knows exactly what the C4E does, what its mission is, and how to work with the C4E. Make sure that you have the operating model. I will get into more detail later on in the slide deck. And then you will need to describe the skills and capabilities of the C4E. As I said, minimal C4E, 3 roles, but you can have multiple architects, multiple developers or engineers, multiple people in leadership, depending on your organization and the requirements. As soon as those roles are filled in and staffed, then you need to make sure that there's a funding model, that the team is enabled, so there's training involved. They should have access to all the relevant documentation and systems. And then you should be starting a backlog. You set up a central repository for sharing assets. We recommend Anypoint Exchange. that allows you to share assets, make them discoverable for the rest of the organization. You need to build a feedback model, and then you need to make sure that you establish the KPIs and a measurement plan. And then we jump all the way to the end where it says measure the impact. This is where you start measuring, because measure the impact is done throughout the whole process. And it's kicked off when you establish the C4E. That's where you decide what key performance indicators you are going to collect and publish to the rest of the organization. Next, build and publish foundational assets. The initial role of the C4E is to identify those critical systems that need to be exposed through system APIs. That is what we call identify assets and create reusable assets for the rest of the projects. You identify third-party and public assets that have to be made available in any point exchange, and you build and publish your foundational assets and your best practices, again, put those in exchange. Then you define the enablement process for delivery and for the operations team. You start onboarding the initial product teams, and you update the software development lifecycle to incorporate integration best practices. One of which could be that for a project to be delivered, it has to be signed off by an integration architect that validates that the integration was built according to the C4E guidelines. During this whole process, the C4E is responsible for evangelization, and that means that they need to make sure that the whole organization agrees on the key value message of integration and of the platform. They build the evangelization plan and the communication plan, and they evangelize assets, best practices, success stories to make sure that additional lines of business start consuming the platform and start adding value to the application network. And then finally, drive consumption. Consumption of assets, consumption of best practices, etc. New teams to onboard onto the platform and use existing assets and create new assets. And for the C4E, they also need to make sure that they identify and harvest new assets that can be reused, standards that need to be updated, and processes that need to be refined. And finally, once those assets have been refined through feedback, they need to be republished so that they can be, again, discovered and reused. And then finally, as I mentioned, measuring the impact is something that starts when you establish the C4E, but it goes on continuously. You gather feedback for existing assets, you measure C4E KPIs, and you develop the improvement recommendations for the C4E. One thing I need to mention is that MuleSoft has built a metrics accelerator. This is a Mule application that allows you to get all the relevant metrics from your Anypoint platform and provide those in a format that is consumable by systems such as Elk or Splunk or Tableau or Power BI, whatever dashboarding tool you want to use. We recommend that customers who are at the point of establishing the C4E and want to start measuring KPIs, these are operational metrics that are definitely useful to start measuring and to keep over time, to convince the business that the platform is being used successfully and its creation value is being created. But over a longer time, you will be able to see that it takes less time to create new value, that it creates less time to create new APIs. So it's an incredibly valuable tool to use in conjunction with a KPI dashboard. So if you type in MuleSoft metrics accelerator, you will be guided to the right page where you can download it. So going back, the phases of building a C4E are to assess and commit to running a C4E, then to establish the C4E with the roles, with the skills, etc. And then it becomes a cyclic process of building and publishing assets, evangelizing those assets, driving consumption by adding new people onto the platform, onboarding them and enabling them, and then measuring the output on the platform and the value that's being created. Based on that feedback, build, update, and publish new assets, look at assets that were created and maybe modify them so they can be reused by other teams. Maybe the documentation isn't fully completed, or maybe there are no example cases, example use cases added to the asset. So that's another role that the C4E takes on. It completes all the documentation, all the additional information required for an asset to be reusable. Then those assets are evangelized, they're consumed, etc., etc. So that's a cyclic process that continues forever. So now, the evolution of a C4E. The reason why this is in here is very simple, because you cannot start off with 200 people in your C4E. So when we look at the operating model, we see a clear evolution from its starting position to its end position. And the starting position is usually called a centralized C4E. In that centralized C4E, we see delivery, we see enablement, and we see ownership of the platform in a single organization. And we see projects reusing assets from that C4E, delivered by the C4E. This only scales so far because you cannot have 200, 300 developers in the C4E. We have customers that, as I said earlier, that have 60 developers in the C4E, but that's an exception. So how do we scale? How do we make sure that we deliver all these requirements? Well, we follow the evolution model to a federated model, where the C4E enables the line of business level, and that means that delivery, which is the green color, delivery is now done by the line of business. The C4E no longer delivers new assets. That's done by line of business. And the C4E focuses only on two things, and that is enablement of the organization, onboarding, and continuing to be the custodian of the platform. The delivery and enablement is now done by line of business towards the projects. This means that you've significantly grown the reach of the platform through the line of business. Because instead of, let's say, 3 projects in the centralized situation, you can now service 9 or even more projects. That means that you've dramatically increased the delivery capability or capacity of your organization just by enabling and onboarding 3 lines of business. The next level is what we call consumer-led. This is where we find our end situation, the end state of the operating model evolution, the final stage. And that is, the C4E still does what it did in the previous step, and that is it does the platform and it does enablement. The line of business does enablement, but now the delivery is done directly in the projects, and the projects are enabled by the line of business. So there's enablement at scale, there's delivery at scale, and the platform is still owned by the C4E. There's one requirement though, and that is that arrow that goes from the project back to the C4E those projects need to create assets, and they need to share those assets so that the C4E can complete them and offer them for reuse. If that's in place, then we can guarantee that you can fill this delivery gap and deliver all the new technology your organization needs, because you're scalable. You can spin up a new project to deliver a new feature or a new technology without having a center of excellence as a bottleneck. Because if you're in the consumer-led evolution of the C4E, there is so much enablement capability that any team onboarding onto the platform can be enabled in record time and can start delivering value and new APIs immediately. Angel, I would like to open it up for questions, please.
Excellent, Arno. Excellent. Thank you very much for the session. We do have a couple of questions so far. I will start demand. The first one is, I think you covered in the second part of the session, but it's around C4E. Is it C4E responsible for only system APIs? Why the line of business IT builds process and experience APIs?
I think not so much responsible as when the C4E first starts, you need some foundational assets to start creating your application network. So we expect the C4E to deliver the first system APIs, but they're not responsible for delivering all of them, especially in the second step of the evolution, when line of business is enabled. We expect that the line of business continues building system APIs for those systems that they own. So it's not necessarily the C4E that builds all system APIs, but it makes sense that in the beginning, they develop those system APIs to expose the most critical systems as soon as possible, so the rest of the organization can discover those APIs and build additional value on top of them.
Okay, thank you for that, Arno. The next one is from Anirudh. Does the C4E team look into production failures or the production support? Does it? And C4E teams are totally different. Or does the C4E team take up responsibilities of a DevOps team, like setting up CI/CD pipelines?
Wow, that's not one question, that's many questions.
Let's do that.
Yeah. But it's a good and very relevant question. First of all, delivering a platform means that the platform needs to be complete, and a complete anypoint platform includes CI/CD. So responsibility for the CI/CD pipeline is within the C4E and not within each of the different DevOps teams. There needs to be a single deployment pipeline that follows all the rules and best practices of the C4E. So we don't expect, let's say, CI/CD engineers in any of the DevOps teams that build APIs. We want that CI/CD pipeline to be delivered by the C4E for everyone. Who's responsible for the operations of the APIs? That depends on the organization. If you have real DevOps teams that are responsible for developing and operating technology, then those DevOps teams would be responsible for the operational side of the APIs as well. And that means that if there is a operational disruption, the first line of support would be the DevOps teams responsible for creating the API. Second line of support would be the C4E, and the C4E would then have the ability to escalate to MuleSoft support if they are unable to find the root cause or fix the problem. Does that answer your question?
It does. And to confirm, it seems that you already have answered. In case someone doesn't know about the MuleSoft recommended support process, I'm going to share the link as well in the chat. That's the one that Arno mentioned. Now we're going to move to the next question from Hakim. how MuleSoft guide for the C4E implementation within DevOps agile delivery strategy that the organizations may have. I'm not sure if you already answered this one, how MuleSoft guides for the C4E implementation within a DevOps agile delivery strategy that an organization may have.
So I think if you look at the evolution of the C4E, especially the last model, those project teams are the DevOps teams. And those DevOps teams need to have a platform in place that is complete. So the platform with CI/CD, with all the standards, with foundational assets, with best practices, all the documentation, including API strategy, needs to be in place before those DevOps teams can onboard onto the platform. As soon as they onboard onto the platform, they have access to everything. They have access to the existing assets. They can discover them. They can read the documentation. They have access to all the best practices and all the coding standards and architectural standards and the reference architecture, etc. So they have a complete overview of what's in place, how to use it, what type of standard to use in which use case, etc. So I would imagine that a new DevOps team or an existing DevOps team would onboard through help from the C4E lead. They would onboard. They would get access to the different assets, both the APIs, but also the documentation and best practices, etc. They would start building APIs and they would start owning APIs, operating them, and only in the case where they are unable to fix problems, issues, or find root causes, will they escalate that to the C4E. So they're pretty much a self-running organization that creates new reusable assets for other teams and maintains their own APIs.
Excellent, Arno. Thank you for that. Hakim, I hope that has answered your question. There's another one from Diman around some examples of KPIs. I share as well a blog post that was made by Stephen, our counterpart of CS in US. And this post talks about 5 main KPIs that you can think of. And there's also some examples in the metric accelerator on metrics and groups of metrics that then can evolve into your KPIs. I don't know, Arno, if you want to add anything else on that one, or? Sure.
So with KPIs, there's no predefined list that every customer will accept. It really depends on the customer. I was talking to one of my customers and the CTO said, I only have one KPI, and that is the number of S1 disruptions caused by MuleSoft. That's the only thing I care about. And so every quarter we would show them a red slide with a 0 on it, because fortunately with them, we never were in a situation where they had a production down issue because of MuleSoft. There are other organizations that want to basically translate everything to finance. So they want to see dollar amounts or whatever currency you use. Those are basically derivatives from numbers that you have somewhere multiplied by a fee per hour or per instance. So it makes a lot of sense to have a look at the metrics accelerator, because that gives you many of the platform metrics that you can use as foundations for those KPIs. So one of those metrics is the amount of reuse in an API. And by reuse, we mean how many consumers have been created that consume the same API. That reuse can then be a percentage, and that percentage can go up or down. And basically what you want to show over time is that reuse increases because you're building more and more components. And with every component, you're creating a reusable component. So reuse should go up. And by showing that in your organization, either as a fixed number, a fixed percentage, or you go back and you calculate a financial reuse number by saying, okay, by reusing an API, we saved X amount of my currency. You can make it very interesting to those people that are funding the effort to see how much value they're getting out of it. So it's not as easy as every customer uses the same metrics. There are different metrics and therefore there are different KPIs, but most of them either revolve around time to market or speed or the increase in speed and the financial implications of using our platform.
Excellent. Then you are not that you're using the reuse example for KPIs, because that's one of the key indicators that I see across many customers. One of the biggest issues is how to define what is reuse about. So thank you for onboarding that one. There is a last question that we have for today. It's from Anirudh, and is, does the C4E team look into production failures as well, or the production support? And if C4E teams are totally different from that?
That depends on your specific implementation of the C4E. In a DevOps environment, I expect that the DevOps team itself would look into a disruption, but may not have the experience and the knowledge that the C4E has. So in most of my customers, the C4E will always be involved in a disruption. They would usually be the ones to notify MuleSoft and work with MuleSoft support using our support portal to get the incident addressed and fixed. It depends. Some organizations have the DevOps teams work directly with MuleSoft support, but we prefer best practice, and that is that the C4E is your organization's level 2, and they get involved in production disturbances, and only when they have no answer or require assistance will they contact MuleSoft support.
Excellent. Well, Arno, I think you have managed to do not only an insightful session, but also to treat all of our different Q&As. Thank you for that. We don't have any more questions, so please, if you found the Q&A helpful, say thank you to Arno in the general chat. And for the rest, I think we will be ready to pass the mic to Anu. And Arno, thank you again for dedicating this time for the community.
Thank you, Angel.
Thanks, Arno.
Thank you.
Cheers, Arno. Hey, Anu, you will have all the power now. I will disconnect. So here you go.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen, and we can. There is also if you could go full screen mode.
That's the best I can do, unfortunately. Oh, that worked.
Yeah. That works better.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Anu Vijayamohan. Some of you may have heard me before. I spoke last time on, I don't even remember what it was. Angel, can you remind me what I spoke on?
Before you were talking about the batch processes. And
yes,
yeah.
That's it. So as you can tell by my accent, I was born in America, but I'm based now in the UK. I've been working in IT for almost 20 years, focused in my past, mostly working on delivery and in professional services. I worked for a company called Appian for 13 years, but I joined MuleSoft Customer Success in July 2019. And yeah, it's been great. So here we are. The things I want to cover today, the topic is deployment considerations, but the agenda will be a quick overview of Anypoint Platform, just so we level set everyone, and an overview of all of our deployment models, and then some considerations for each model, and then how to decide on which model is right for you. And then we'll move to questions. So let's start with a quick overview of Anypoint Platform. While exploring different deployment strategies for Anypoint Platform and MuleSoft, it's important to remember a set of top-level components. This diagram illustrates a high-level view of MuleSoft's technology. Mule runtime engine and services are the foundation of any point platform, easily configurable, performant, and deployable anywhere. Design Center is full of comprehensive tools to develop APIs and integrations faster and easier. Exchange is the marketplace that promotes reuse of pre-built and custom code, and Management Center allows you to manage and monitor across the platform in a single place. The Anypoint Platform Management plane or control plane provides a set of cloud services that simplify the design, reuse, management of integrations and APIs. These cloud services are available in a multi-tenant environment of the Anypoint platform in the US and the EU regions. MuleSoft also offers a single tenant environment via Private Cloud Edition, which allows customers to deploy the entire Anypoint platform on-premise or in private clouds, such as AWS. The Anypoint Platform Runtime plane is where applications are deployed, and is also where the Mule Runtime Engine and other application-related services, such as Anypoint connectors, run. The Runtime Engine includes Anypoint security edge policies and tokenization, MQ, object store, and connectors. Although there are various options to deploy applications on Mule runtimes, there are several factors to consider when choosing your preferred deployment model. First, understand the options. Illustrated here, you can see that each deployment option by where it is deployed and who manages it. Cloudhub, the fully managed cloud, is deployed in, well, the cloud, and managed fully by MuleSoft, Design Center, Exchange, Management Center, and the runtimes. Runtime Fabric is also deployed in the cloud, but the Mule runtime can be deployed on-premise with the RTF appliance and runtimes on infrastructure managed by the customer. The on-premise and hybrid deployments see Design Center, Exchange, and Management Center in the cloud and managed by MuleSoft, but the runtimes are managed fully by the customer with no RTF appliance. And last but not least, Anypoint Private Cloud Edition, or PCE, is fully managed on-premise by the customer and on customer infrastructure. With so many options, how do you know how to make the right choice for your enterprise? Each deployment model has pros and cons. It is important to take these into account when making the decision that's best for you. Let's go back to Cloudhub again. It is the most simple deployment model with integrations fully hosted in the cloud. There's no customer infrastructure needed, and Cloudhub has a 99.9% guaranteed uptime. It can also manage multiple runtime versions. These are all pros, but what if you require lengthy security certifications or reviews before deploying integrations to the cloud, but you want to get started right away? Or some of the data sources that you need to access are causing latency issues, then you may want to consider another approach. Even in 2021, there are significant scenarios where our customers are not ready or willing to move into a full cloud solution just yet, but they can adopt the control plane in the cloud and choose to deploy applications on-premise. Runtime Fabric allows for isolated application runtime pairs similar to Cloudhub, and it allows for the flexibility with deployment locations with the highest application density of all models. Highest application density meaning more applications per core. However, it requires customers to have a knowledge of Docker and Kubernetes, as well as host their own infrastructure for on-premise deployments, and additional infrastructure to host the Runtime Fabric service. Hybrid deployment is one of the more flexible deployment models with low latency to on-premise data sources, and it is the most efficient model for customers with on-premise only source and target systems. The Cloudhub VPC can be easily connected to customers' data centers or private AWS VPCs. However, for anything outside of Cloudhub, it is required that customers host their own infrastructure, and they must govern the peripheral tools and patterns such as load balancing, high availability, and patching that go with that. On-premise runtimes also allow for low latency to on-premise data sources with all integrations hosted on-premise, but again, requires customers to host their own infrastructure and govern their own peripheral tools and patterns. Without proper infrastructure and knowledge to properly manage that infrastructure, this could result in operational challenges while trying to scale. Private Cloud Edition is fully on-premise and meets certain customers' legal, security, and governance requirements, such as nothing is allowed in the cloud. However, significant ongoing customer investment in infrastructure, management, and monitoring is required, as well as significant knowledge in Docker and Kubernetes. On top of that, the roadmap is approximately 1 year behind any point platform. Many features are missing as compared to the other deployment models. Upgrades, patches, and fixes are managed fully by the customer, and often there are many operational challenges when trying to scale. Given the pros and cons of each deployment model, the information can be overwhelming. How do you choose what's right for your organization? Beyond the pros and cons, there are also a number of other important factors to help you decide. What's the most important for your organization? Prioritize the needs of your business and IT organizations, and this will help guide you to the right choice. Consider the following factors. Deployment flexibility. Will you need to access private data sources? Will you need to deploy into cloud sometimes and on-premise other times? Or state management. Where and how long will you need to save state and data within an application? How about performance and reliability? Are having high availability and zero downtime deployments important to you? Reuse strategy is also a factor for consideration. Having the ability to share APIs to Exchange is important for discovery. Also, consider the desire for future-proofing. Do you want to make upgrades as easy as possible? And last but not least, business drivers. In fact, sometimes this is the most important. If you're looking to go quick to market with the easiest and fastest deployments, then Cloudhub might be your best option. So we've created some handy charts to help guide you through this prioritization. Let's take a real-life example. A customer has a cloud-first strategy with some private data sources on-premise they want to access. Their IT department is small but maturing, so they may not have Docker and Kubernetes expertise. Some of their applications might need access to persistent queues, and having an access to an OS v2 would also be advantageous. Looking at the chart above, they would consider perhaps Cloudhub or Runtime Fabric, but PCE would be a non-starter. I'm gonna stop for just a second on this chart so that everyone has a moment to take a look before I move on. Okay, so let's add in even more variables. There's some high availability and failover requirements for some applications, as well as zero downtime requirements. And isolation between applications is of extreme importance, as well as ease of upgrades. Given these factors, I personally would recommend Cloudhub for a fast start that aligns with their cloud-first strategy, with an option to move to RTF if their needs expand. But that's not all. There's even more factors to consider. Building your platform will also require skills and effort to operate the tools. Here's a snapshot of what skills are required to keep your Mule deployments operational. By choosing Cloudhub, the expertise of system administrators or infrastructure specialists won't be a priority. But as you add more on-premise components, such as in RTF, hybrid and on-premise deployments, more expertise in-house will be required. For PCE, a full staff covering all capabilities, system administration, DevOps and automation, testing, infrastructure, and network specialists will all be necessary to execute successfully. There are also some features that differ across topologies. Cloudhub has Anypoint MQ, for example, but clustering is only possible in on-premise or RTF environments. Runtime Fabric also has advanced tokenization features and edge security. Monitoring is available in all three types of deployments, but requires extra configuration for on-premise environments. I know this sounds like a lot, but we're here to help you. During the sales cycle, your sales engineer can talk you through these options to help you decide what's best. And after that, your customer success and strategy architects, me, Angel, Arno, whoever is in your region, are here to help you if you decide you want to move from one deployment topology to another. And with that, I will open up for questions.
Toledano, thank you very much for the brief. I think the community will thank that after the masterclass on that was a little bit more theoretical from Arno. So far, we have no questions. So if the community is curious about anything in particular, this is the chance to write. Otherwise, we will assume that you have no questions and you will be interested in seeing the slides when we share tomorrow.
Did I scare you guys off?
Oh, we got one. If you're using Cloudhub, how do we handle cross-application error handling? If we're using Cloudhub, how do we manage cross-application error handling? Raul, could you explain a little bit more on that question? Are we talking about, for example, having experienced APIs in Cloudhub, or having experienced process system and doing the error propagation through the different layers?
Or error splits, for example.
Yeah, for example.
Yes, sorry, which one?
Sorry, Raul, is that related to the having experience APIs, process APIs, and system APIs, how to handle those cross-applications errors?
So in that case, I would recommend a correlation ID. Angel, feel free to jump in if I miss anything. You can use the same correlation ID to connect your flow through APIs.
Yeah, besides the correlation ID, there's also a guide that is also available in Catalyst that gives you the best practices on error handling as well, right? If you're doing system, you want to expose errors that could be low level from the backend so the ops team can understand what is going on. Well, as you say, process API or experience API, you want to do a different kind of exposure. This is in one of the Catalyst documents. What I can do is I will, because I'm taking note of all the links I'm sharing this time, and I will add them to the event. So I will add the Catalyst link to that one around implementation best practices for error handling across layers.
Thank you, Angel.
Okay, we have another one from Hakim. That is, how is the latency monitored in an hybrid deployment?
So how is latency? It's the same way you would monitor latency in your networks internally. There's no MuleSoft special way, I think.
Yeah, and additionally, having the correlation ID, you can always have a timestamp when you're starting from it. For, let's say, an experience API, you have your timestamp there, or you're using endpoint monitoring, and then you will have it the same from system, and you can measure the end-to-end because you will know when you're responding back from that initial consumer. That is one way of doing it.
Yeah.
But if the question is how is the latency itself, how is it produced, it will really depend on where are your locations, right? Because if you think about runtime plane, where are you deploying the runtime plane? Where is your server, and so forth.
Where's the data that you're pulling? Is it in another server on your network that's far away? All of these things would be part of the...
Thank you for that, Anu. There's another one. Oh, we're getting more. Do you have a link to the page where we can see the licensing cost for each of the options? Oh, that's a good question. It's a shame we don't have a SE around here.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have the idea.
No, I don't know much about licensing. I tend to stay away from that conversation, but I would speak to the AE on your account about that.
Yes, and if you don't have an AE assigned, you can always use the mulesoft.com and look for contact us, because we don't really work with the licenses directly. Now, the next one, is correlation ID unique across systems? That's coming from demand.
I think it's something you would have to manage in your requests, correct?
Yes, and before in Mule 3, you had to do it manually. You have to drop in the UUID, so you do it by a script. While now you can do it in Mule 4. In many cases, you can do it automated, especially when you're doing HTTP requests and you just configure the correlation ID. Back to the question itself, is it unique across system? It has to be. unique across your request, because it could be that the correlation ID appears through the different layers, but it just means that the request is going through all these different layers, right? You want to backtrack where is that request going through, so you have, for example, an end-to-end time, or you want to know if for business that the experience API correlation ID request will be considered as a product being sold, and then you want to keep track of that one. I hope that answers the question, Diman. We have another one from Rao. If we have two database events processors, how is latency for cloud database like AWS Aurora or Snowflake?
So cloud to cloud would also depend on the network that you're on. Generally, it's, I would say, pretty fast, but.
Yeah, and there's an interesting one there, because you could use, there is this latency test. I'm using this one, but there should be plenty of others available to you. You have to think about your runtime plane. Where are you running your application that is connecting to that AWS Aurora or Snowflake? And you can compare on where is the latency per region. That will add on top of what is the time for processing your requesting the Mule application, and how long it takes for your database to actually process it as well. Sorry that we cannot give a precise answer on that one, but anything related with performance and performance tuning is usually a matter of testing, because you can have theories of multi-threading, but if you don't test it, you cannot know for sure.
Always performance test, everyone.
Yes, JMeter and automated in your CI/CD, ideally. Are Dockers and Kubernetes really required for RTF or hybrid deployments? Is it possible to do deployments on-premise without them? That is a question from Anirudh.
So I think with RTF, you definitely need a Dockers and Kubernetes background. It will definitely help you. You could do on-premise with regular servers or in AWS without that.
Yeah, exactly. The on-prem is also known as a standalone. Just a quick add-on there, because I had a customer that was working with RTF. They wanted to start with RTF, and they didn't have any experience with Kubernetes and Docker. And even though sometimes it's seen as anyone can just start playing with RTF and making a successful deployment, it's not that trivial. You need, as Anu mentioned as well, to have that background on Dockers and Kubernetes. Why? Because if you go into RTF itself, you have the 3 replicas. And if you know Kubernetes, it already starts to make sense. It clicks in your mind. Hope Anu answered your question. Anirudh,
there's one more. Yeah. Is there a deep dive session planned on various deployment models?
that will be interesting. If the community is interested on a deep dive session, that sounds more like a one-to-one. Has, for example, let's go into Runtime Fabric, let's go into Cloudhub and focus on that one instead of making everything. Because technically wise, if you abort the 4 of them in one session in detail,
that's a lot.
It can take a long time.
I recommend, Mohammed, contacting your CS team to schedule something like that.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Anu. Shubhendu is also called transaction ID, correlation ID. The concept will remain the same. If you're using the enterprise integration patterns from Gregor Hope, it will be called correlation ID. I think in Mule 4, they may have changed it to transaction ID. But as long as you're using it, has that ID that allows you, UID that allows you to know where the request started and where it ends, even if it goes through many API layers, it's all right. Yes, you can use it as a header as well. There's another one here, different between RTF and on-premise. I thought they were the same, from Anirudh.
I might give this one to you, Angel. I'm not very good at explaining the difference.
Yeah, that's all right. This one is related to the standalone. So there's a point here that we don't recommend using MuleSoft without the control plane, meaning you have your runtime plane, your applications on a runtime without the what you can see as the anypoint platform or control plane seen over them with the API management and so forth. RTF is different from on-prems in the sense that RTF will be an hybrid as well. You can do Cloudhub deployments, but you will be using Kubernetes and Docker. On-prem is the old way of doing it since the beginning of MuleSoft. You have the standalone server that is basically you have your own, you manage your own server, and you have to deploy the application. You install your Mule runtime into an operating system, and then you run it. And everything is up to you. High availability, disaster recovery, everything will be up to the customer to understand and how to approach. While in RTF, if you have the knowledge of Kubernetes and Docker, there should be plenty, as we saw in the presentation, of features that are already done. I hope that answers the question. Arno, if you're more interested on it, you can also check for Mule cluster, MuleSoft cluster, and that's usually an example of a standalone where they talk about the shared load memory and other concepts. Yeah, you're welcome. Sujit, you are, I think, our last question for today. We are already on time. In RTF, the control plane is managed by the customer. Sorry, managed by MuleSoft. While in on-premise, the control plane is managed by the customer. That is, I don't know, Anu, if you want to answer that one.
He was answering the question previously.
Yeah, that's correct. Just as before, the on-prem. Okay, sorry, I was getting excited. I was trying to answer another question. Oh, fair, Sujit. Thank you for that. Excellent. Well, oh no, there's more questions. There's more here. Mohamed, is there a deep dive session plan for the various deployments? We are going to consider that. Let me add it into the list. Dockers and Kubernetes really require.
I think these are the same questions that were in the chat.
Yes, they are. Okay, everyone. So thank you for Anu for this session. I think we managed to get all the questions answered. There's the one pending around error handling. I'm pretty sure that this document will help you. I think it was demand.
I hope you have the charts. We worked really hard on them. So.
Yes, the tables, right? You were leading the whole team on that one. Well, thank you, Anu, for the great session. Thank you, community, for attending, for the engagement that you usually have. And we are seeing each other next week in the panel session where we will have Francis, Kevin, and Mark to tell us about their toughest integration challenges and how they manage to overcome them. Very exciting session. Make sure you are RSVP. I will add it as well to our Meetups page. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.